What salary cap tools will the Pacers have to add to their team this offseason, and how could the aprons be instructive on what the Pacers hope to do? Plus, if the Pacers keep their pick, could their rookie actually start? A new take on that all coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and Circle City Spin. And today, much to get into as we look ahead at the Pacers offseason by looking at their resources outside of the draft. Many questions in the mailbag this week were about the MLE and the mid-level exception. Who could the Pacers get? What's the best player they could get? What should they be targeting? And to be clear, I think most have understood this, but that is probably something they can't use if they get their draft pick. But I want to run through all the resources, MLE included, that could be available to the Pacers this summer, how those impact the aprons. Yes, not the tax, the aprons, and how those are considerations for the Pacers. And at the end, I actually got a very interesting discussion in our Everydayer Club chat about the lottery pick, if the Pacers should keep it, and their spot starting, that maybe do a fun research project that I think the results are very interesting as it pertains to the Pacers. Okay, let's start with the salary cap, as we do. Everybody loves when I talk about the salary cap. I try to make it interesting, and it is for the Pacers right now because, as has been said, they enter the offseason with about $194.5 million in guaranteed salaries, and that includes no Kobe Brown, no Micah Potter, no Cam Jones, no Quentin Jackson, some or all of them who could actually be in the mix to be on the team next year. And that's an important number because it's not very far from the tax, and it's not very far from the aprons, and it's even less far from the tax. But the tax is not a really big focus today, although it kind of is. The apron will be. The first apron is going to be about $209 million, depending where the cap lands. The tax projects to be about $201 million. So what can the Pacers actually do to add to their team when there are key barriers right there? And even if you are a Pacers should pay the tax guy, and if you think they would have last year if they had kept Miles Turner, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't have. Kevin Pritchard said there were other barriers, including aprons, that would have been factors and that were considerations in negotiations. So those will come up today. I'll get to those later because getting to those first would have been way too much information overload. But here's what could be available to the Pacers this offseason in free agency. And to be clear, most of the things I'm about to tell you are only options for the team if they do not keep their top four pick. Because if they do, they will add 10 to 15 more million in salary to their books, maybe even a little more than that. And that makes it very hard to actually add a real player in free agency without blowing past some of these spending thresholds, and in some cases hard capping yourself, which may not even be smart to do. But the big one is the one that I talked about yesterday and was asked the most about by listeners, which is the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. That is available to teams that are over the cap but under the first apron. And that's an important distinction to get to as we continue here. But it's a pretty big exception. And some teams use it to sign a player to the full value of it, but it's kind of changed the last couple of years now because it can be used to claim players off of waivers. It can be used to take in a player as a trade exception. So some teams hold on to it or are less, rushing to use it in free agency. There were not a lot of players signed. I think DeAnthony Melton was one of the few with the full mid-level this past offseason. I believe with my own math, again, this depends on where the salary cap officially comes in, but it's going to be about 4 years, $65 million is the most you could possibly offer a player using the non-taxpayer mid-level exception in the offseason. And that is as a signing and in theory, depending on hard caps, as a waiver claim or via trades as well. But the MLE is more than just that. And by more, I mean technically it can be less than that because the taxpayer mid-level exception, this is kind of hard to explain. I think some people have trouble with this, but the taxpayer mid-level and the non-taxpayer mid-level are actually the same thing. It's actually just every team over the cap has one mid-level exception, and those are just different versions of it. But you spend up to it. It's hard to explain this. There's a limit on what counts as just being the taxpayer mid-level based on how many years a contract is or what the first year value is. The taxpayer mid-level for the coming season projects to start at just over $6 million, and the maximum value of that would be 3 years, $19.1 million. So let's say you signed a player to a 3-year deal that goes to $20 million. It's so close to the taxpayer, but it would count as the non-tax, right? But it's functionally the same thing. It's just what bucket it goes into and how it affects your aprons are a little different. That's not a great explanation. If I had unlimited time, I could do better than that. But that is actually the same thing. They don't have one non-taxpayer mid-level and one taxpayer, as the name suggests, being opposites. They only have one of those things. And for the sake of this exercise, I actually think it's more possible the Pacers would just use the taxpayer amount, and I'll explain why in the second segment. But as we talk here, if the Pacers do not keep their pick, they could have up to that $15 million amount-ish, probably a little less for reasons we'll get to later, to add a real player to their team if they wanted to. Even if they keep their pick, it's possible on inbounds, although I would guess probably not, that they could use the taxpayer to add like a little $6 million player, and then somewhere in between is more likely where reality lands. But that is their strongest tool to add someone else who is not previously on their team in terms of bringing in additional talent to fortify their bench, to get a stronger front line if they want to do that. There's all sorts of ways it could be used reasonably. In the past, for example, they used the tax pyramid level on like Justin Holiday level players. Kyle O'Quinn got the room exception, which is close to something we're talking about in a second. I'm sure I'm missing several guys, but that's the type of player you can get. Like a low-end starter could be gotten with the non-tax, and a high-end backup with everything else. Okay. And then the other thing that is available to the Pacers as an actual exception is called the biannual exception. This one is not quite as straightforward as the mid-level. It's a 2-year or 1-year deal, but using it means you get one every 2 years, but if you use it 1 year, you can't use it the next. So not using it 1 year is in theory beneficial because you could then use it the next. But if you use it on a 1-year contract, you still cannot use it the next season. The maximum value of it is 2 years, $11.1 million. The first year value for the coming season would be about $5.478 million. Again, these could all change depending on where the cap comes in. The Pacers could have this available to them. They could use it for the same reasons as the MLE, for a signing, for a waiver, for a trade. If a player fits in, great. You can use that exception to add them. Now, important distinctions that will come up in the second segment, but signing or using the BAE to acquire a player, that hard caps a team at the first apron. They cannot exceed that $209 million threshold. If the Pacers keep their pick, they're already close to that without using it. If you use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, same thing, you were hard capped at the first apron. If the Pacers keep their pick, they probably can't use that, and they probably couldn't have anyway functionally with how high their spending would have been. But that is the reality is that those exceptions could have value and be ways for the Pacers to add to their team, but would put a hard ceiling on their spending. And to be clear, right this second, me talking, the Pacers are hard capped at the first apron. It's not that big of a deal if you're far from it, or if the restrictions that come with it aren't important to you. But for the Pacers next year, they could actually be a big deal. So those are the two exceptions that are by far the things you'll hear talked about the most, including for me in terms of how the Pacers could add players when we do the free agency previews by position, which will be way more interesting if the Pacers don't keep their pick. But I think every fan would prefer that the Pacers do, obviously. Those will be two very commonly discussed things. Other ways of adding a player and or signing a player. Any team at any time, as long as they're not hard capped and literally can't do it, can sign a player to a minimum contract. For example, the Warriors last year were too close to their hard cap to sign a player until mid-November. That's why they had to wait to sign Seth Curry. The Mavs couldn't sign a player until late in the year. There's lots of examples where you can't technically do it, but if you are not hard capped or you're far from your hard cap, you can sign a player to a minimum contract at any time, no problem. That is the vet minimum of a 2-year deal at the minimum. Bird rights are always a way a team can exceed the cap or pay players while they're over the cap. Unfortunately for the Pacers, not even unfortunately, for the Pacers, though, that's not really a relevant thing. This offseason, bird rights are given to players who, or a version of them, non-bird, early bird, whatever, are given to players who finished a season with a specific team. That team gets whatever their rights are. You have to have been under contract on your previous deal for at least 3 years, or have been with your previous team for 3 years to have full bird rights. Technically, that would apply to Kobe Brown, but there's something different with him. And then Micah Potter could be a free agent. If he is, that means he's only 1 year into his deal, so he'd have non-bird rights. But that could, in theory, allow the Pacers to give him more than the minimum. They wouldn't, but they could. That's it. Quentin Jackson and Cam Jones to be free agents would have to be literally waived, and that removes your rights. So Kobe Brown's interesting because technically he's been under his same contract for 3 years, but because his 4th-year rookie option got declined, there's a hard ceiling on what can be spent on him this offseason. So on one hand, that completely neutralizes the value of his bird rights. On the other hand, if the Pacers sign him to a short deal, he could get an implicit no trade clause, but also he would have full bird rights after the season if they wanted to pay him more in future seasons. That may not even be a relevant factor for a 27-year-old who, has only proven himself with one team, but is still noteworthy. But bird rights matter, minimums matter, those two exceptions. Then, of course, the Pacers can, if they draft a player that they trade for their draft rights, like via first-round pick, or they pick someone in the second round, they get either their rookie scale deal or the second-round pick exception. All these things can be used to add players even while over the cap. So there are plenty of ways for the Pacers to bring in players, but can they actually functionally do that? That's actually quite challenging for them because of these aforementioned distances from the aprons. Aprons are new territory for a lot of listeners. Well, I'll talk about why they'll be a factor in this offseason. Before we talk more about could their rookie actually start, that's all coming up here on Locked On Pacers. But first, everybody, got to talk to you guys about Kalshi. The NBA playoffs are here. It's the most electric time in basketball, and on Kalshi, you can trade every single playoff game, every series, the conference finals, and the championship. For example, Orlando is trading at a 24% probability to beat Detroit. Detroit at 77% there. A $100 trade pays out $127.80 for the series. As the playoffs heat up, those numbers move in real time. You can buy in or out anytime. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position for a limited time. Download the Kalshi app and use the code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, Kalshi, trade on anything. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and availability markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. And we are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, any of these playoff matchups, I'm recording at halftime of Celtics Sixers, so I cannot refer to you to any of the results of Tuesday night, but any of these games could be some series ended, or go to Locked On Suns. They had an actually successful season where you get swept in the first round. That's very rare. Ben Garcia will have more on the end of the Suns. And also check out the Everydayer Club. This will come up later in the third segment because a conversation from there sparked the third segment today, but you can get Locked On Pacers ad-free with the Everydayer Club or your favorite Locked On show, plus members-only Discord access. Join at LockedOnPodcast.com/Everydayer. Okay, let's talk about aprons. Cooking aprons, whatever your favorite apron is. The first and second one will be the big ones today. The third apron is Yossi Goslin's salary cap blog. That's very, very good. Okay, a lot to get to here. So the first apron I mentioned earlier, coming in, projected right now, $209 million-ish. Again, these numbers could go up and down depending on where the cap lands, but there's a rough estimate to give you a good general framework of what is relevant for the Pacers. Right now, the Pacers are actually hard capped at the first apron for the current league year, the one that ends July 1st. They're $7.7 million shy of it. It's not a big deal, but they used the trade exception to get Jay Huff into the James Wiseman trade exception. And so instead they didn't have to salary match. And guess what? That hard capped them with the first apron. It didn't matter at all. And that's my way of saying some of these words that sound gobbledygook or scary or like, whoa, they can't do what? Like, it's not actually that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal. It matters. It's a thing. They were hard capped at the second apron 2 years ago because they traded cash for the Johnny Furphy pick. Like, no one even knew that the whole season, because sometimes the stuff is not effectively important for the way a team operates, even though the spending thresholds are relevant or inbounds. That's all important to know, even if it's very like, information. So the first apron, again, $209 million. Pacers are close to it now. You trigger a first apron hard cap. What I mean by that is you cannot exceed in any circumstance $209 million expending if you do any of the following. One is a signing using the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, meaning you exceed the value of the taxpayer mid-level. If you use the taxpayer mid-level, you are not hard capped at the first apron, which is very relevant to the Pacers. If they get the fourth pick, they actually could use some taxpayer mid-level and sign a real free agent who could potentially give them some minutes and get the draft pick and still not be hard capped. That's inbounds to me. I would not think they would do that, but that is possible within their current framework. But if they go over the taxpayer amount and use the non-tax, they would immediately be hard capped at $209 million and have a lot of trouble fitting in their team, right? So keep that in mind. But to me, if they keep their pick, they're probably not using any mid-level at all. And even if they don't, because they're $15 million shy of the first apron without 4 players, they had to fill 3 roster spots at least. They probably can't, and by probably I mean they certainly cannot functionally use all of the non-taxpayer mid-level. So everybody keeps asking me, who should they get with the full mid-level and things like that? Sure, I can tell you what the amount of it is and who might be worth it and who would fit the Pacers, but they functionally can't do that. It's probably closer to if they wanted to actually max out their mid-level spending, like 9 or 10 million, because they have to sign 2 or 3 other players to minimum contracts to fill out their team, to finish their roster, right? So if you think about the best player you think the Pacers can get with their mid-level if they don't keep their pick, do not aim for $15 million players, aim for like $10-ish million players. I know that's silly after I just did 2 mailbags talking about something different, but I didn't want to get into the weeds then. I will today. So that is a big deal. The way the mid-level triggers aprons is important. The second apron is triggered by using the taxpayer mid-level exception. The first apron, the $209 million one, is also hit if a player is acquired other ways with the mid-level at all. If you take in a player via trade who fits into the taxpayer mid-level, but you take them into the mid-level via trade, boom, hard capped at the first apron. If you acquire a player via sign and trade, you're hard capped at the first apron. If you take back more money in a salary match, if you're over the cap, you're hard capped at the first apron. If you sign somebody who made more in the MLE and got bought out, guess what? You're hard capped at the first apron. If you use a trade exception generated in the prior season, that does not matter for the Pacers, but that's how they're hard capped right now. You're hard capped at the first apron. All of those things are things that the Pacers probably will not be doing, because even if they don't use these resources in free agency, let's pretend they're having an awesome season, like a fantastic season before the buyout market, they might want to be able to add the best buyout player and really maximize their chance at a title in the coming season. And so being hard capped at the first apron would prevent them from doing some of the best possible moves. So there actually is benefit to not doing some of those things that I just said, even if the transaction itself would be good. And that's part of the weight when you make the move. If hard capping yourself at the first apron is being done so you can sign Nikola Jokic to a 1-year, $8 million contract at the non-tax mid-level, you do it. Obviously, you don't care about the hard cap at that point, but that's an extreme example. You get what I'm saying? There is wiggle room in between to figure out, is this worth doing if it also hard caps your team at a certain spending threshold, and that's not out of bounds that the Pacers would be leaning up against these thresholds. They're all very close and very reasonable. And if they keep their pick, which to be clear is the thing that they hope happens, right, then they probably can't do any of these things without becoming close to the hard cap, or, they're going to cross the tax at that point, which isn't even something we're really talking about today. We're just talking about what they theoretically can do. So if they keep the pick, kind of forget a lot of the stuff I just said in reality. But if they don't, a lot of that stuff is stuff they have to consider that they may or may not want to do. It makes it harder for them to buy a second round pick if trading cash for that pick hard caps them in an apron. That's actually close to where they could be from a team salary perspective. So these are just things to keep in mind. The second apron is much higher, about $222 million. That's like $30 million in additional spending for the Pacers. That is almost impossible for them to even do. Like if they kept Kobe Brown as high as they possibly could and gave Micah Potter a raise and got the first pick and used all of the tax mid-level, they'd get close, I think. But I don't even think they could get there if they realistically wanted to with what their situation is. But using any of the mid-level at all is a hard cap at the second apron. If you aggregate 2 player salaries in a trade, like the Pacers did in the Zubats trade, for example, like that, hard capped them a second apron. That didn't matter because they were already hard capped at the first apron, but they aggregated Ben Mathurin and Isaiah Jackson salaries in order to get Ivica Zubats. That's a second apron hard cap, right? So it's all fascinating how that works. Sending out cash in a trade, like the Pacers did in that Furphy trade I mentioned earlier, that's a second apron hard cap. I just misspoke 2 seconds ago. You can't match salaries in a sign and trade with the second apron hard cap in mind. You can still send somebody out who's being sign and traded, but if you take in money or you use a trade exception after sign and trading somebody away, same general principle. So these are probably not things the Pacers are as worried about. They're not going to exceed $222 million in team spending this season, but there are certainly apron considerations for them this year in a way that there haven't been before. And it's not even like, oh, they're close to the aprons. It's they could have functionally different ways of adding players to their team if they get close to these, right? They could not be able to spend as much on this. They could not be able to add as much salary now. They might not be able to aggregate salaries at all or take back more money than they send out in a trade. There's so many complicating factors that, again, make it actually strategically smart to at least consider staying under the aprons if presented with ways to not exceed those aprons. So this all will come down to where their pick lands and if they keep it at all. But these are real considerations as the Pacers value what their resources are, how they can add to their team, and what it will prevent them from doing in other ways. But the reason I've kind of viewed what I've said is keep the pick or use the mid-level is because of what I just said. Hard caps are in play, and their mid-level amount that they'd be able to spend drastically changes about their pick and their hard cap situation. So, of course, it'd be awesome if they could get a good player at the tax mid-level and pick someone very high in the draft. That'd be the best way for them to improve their team as much as possible. But I'm not necessarily sure that that's going to be possible for them. It's probably one or the other. And now we close this one out by talking about a question that got asked in a mailbag, but from a different angle. People keep asking, would a rookie start? Who would move to the bench if they keep a top 4 pick? And I'll answer that with a different angle coming up to close out today's Locked On Pacers. And we are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen, Locked On NBA Game Night. Myself and Jake Madison will be talking about the games of the night from Tuesday night around the NBA. Really looking forward to Spurs Blazers in a while. I caught the first half of the first 2 games. And of course, Jake will be on there as well. Okay, a couple other things that I want to get to today. And by that, I mean one other thing. And that is yesterday, there was a mailbag question about the lottery pick the Pacers could have, a top 4 pick, and would that player start? And I'm going to be clear before I venture out a little farther here. Stand by my answer. If you missed it, I said no, they would not. But one, Aaron Nesmith and Andrew Nembhard are quite good, and they fit very well between Siakam and Haliburton. And that is the core of my argument is the players that you would hope to have between Siakam and Haliburton are good shooters and good defenders, or great defenders and great shooters in the case of these guys. They're perfect fits, and they've been perfect fits on teams that were half a game away from a championship. You don't shake that up for a guy because of potential, right? You have a window right now. So to me, the answer is no. None of them would start. Boozer, I guess you could be like, oh, she started the 5, but no, you start Zubac. You just traded for that guy. So no, the answer to me is none of the 4 would start for the Pacers. They would all come off the bench. Nesmith and Nembhard will be brought up, and maybe the guy who they draft could come in as the first sub for Nembhard, and then Nembhard could come in for Haliburton. And so there's a different dynamic at backup point guard. Don't get me wrong. There are ways the Pacers rotation could be different by who they draft or what position they draft or things of that nature. I'm not trying to poo-poo that, but I don't think any player, and I still don't, even after I'm about to tell you, I do not think any player drafted in the top 4 would start for the Pacers this year. However, in our Everyday Club chat, there was actually a good pushback, not to the answer saying I was wrong, but just about, that's super rare that somebody would, have that situation. Master Mike said, Tony said even the number 1 pick wouldn't start. Has that ever happened? The answer is yes, but I'll get to who it is in a second. Tough to make that pick if they're going to come off the bench. That pick would go for a store call in the trade. I'm not going to get into the trade stuff until we know if they do or do not have the pick. That's just speculating about speculation. But it is a good point to say here that how often does this actually happen? Because where the Pacers are is such a rare spot where you have a top-end pick and you're really good, or potentially have a top-end pick. The Warriors, of course, with Wiseman, that didn't go very well, and starting him actually was quite bad for them. They won a title the year he didn't play, but James Wiseman was on that team, and he started over half of his games that year. But let's zoom out. What I wanted to think about after they said this was that's a good point. When is the last time a number 1 pick or even a top 5 pick, because that usually they go to bad teams, but when's the last time one of these players played a lot but did not start hardly ever? And ironically, for the sake of this argument, it just happened this year. This is not to say that this happens all the time, but just stay with me here. This just happened. Dylan Harper with the Spurs played 69 games for the Spurs this year and started 4 times. De'Aaron Fox and Stephon Castle started for that team. And I thought, oh, okay, there we go. There's one. But that is very rare. And that happened not like the Spurs were not good the last couple years, but they were clearly going to try to be good this year. They traded for De'Aaron Fox last year. Wemby's awesome. They have other good players between them that fit very well. Champagny, Barnes, Vassell, Castle, right? It is a similar situation in that way. Harper came off the bench. He was quite good for them. He's been good in the playoffs. And nobody thinks the Spurs have stunted his development by having him behind those other guys. He still played almost half of the minutes in every game that they played. But he was the only one of the top 5 this year. Last year, there was only one top 5 pick, and this was not even a top 4 pick. It was exactly the 5th pick who fit the criteria. What I searched for was I used the current NBA awards cutoff to do this. I searched for players who played greater than 65 games as a rookie and started 32 or less and were also a top 5 pick that year. So the next guy after Dylan Harper to have that happen was Ron Holland, the 5th pick the year before. He was the 5th pick by Detroit in 2024. And he played 81 games his rookie year and started twice. He played 78 games this year and started 5 of them. So he's in their rotation off the bench. He is not viewed as good of a prospect as any of the guys this year, obviously, but he is still a good prospect. He's a good player. He's a rotation player for the best team in the Eastern Conference. So important distinction that the most recent two players that my query applied to kind of fit the Pacers mold, in that the team they were on, the Pistons were the 6th seed last year, right? The team they were on was good right away and had Asar Thompson, Tobias Harris, and I am somehow blanking on the 2 guard for the Pistons last year because they changed their team a little bit, but whatever. They had other young guys or good players right in front of them who fit very well next to the team's best players. But besides those 2 guys, in the last decade of our lives, the last 10 years of time, only 2 other players fit the bill. Top 5 pick, played 65 games, started less than 32. Did Dylan Harper, it's Ron Holland. Chris Dunn, way back in the day. Remember Chris Dunn when he was so spectacular in Summer League that people thought, in preseason really, that people thought that this was like the steal of the draft for Minnesota? That was not the case. He's a fine player. Chris Dunn, in his first year for the Timberwolves, played 78 games and started 7 of them, and he shot 37.7% from the field. And ironically, the final player is playing tonight and is very good. It's Jaylen Brown with the Celtics. He went 3rd overall in 2016, and in his first year with Boston, he played in 78 games and started 20 times. That didn't really stunt his growth. He's a 6-time All-Star now. He's an amazing player. So on one hand, you see these situations. Chris Dunn's still playing. Jaylen Brown is a stud, and Jalen Harper's going to be a stud. Ron Holland is at least going to be a good player. These are all good players who have played on good teams for a lot of their career. Chris Dunn obviously bounced around because he got traded in the Jimmy Butler trade right away, but these are good players. So it does sort of reinforce what I'm saying, or good team situations, where it does, like, I guess the Wolves weren't awesome Chris Dunn's rookie year, but in general, for the player to have to come off the bench, it's because their team is already good. Their team is already good and has players at their position. And I would not say it really stunted the growth of any of those guys. But my point that I came out of this thinking was, I was actually surprised in the last 10 years that would be 50 top 5 picks, right? That only 4 times have they not started very often. And a lot of times, of course, they might not have reached 65 games at all. Like, that query is not perfect. But players who actually played a lot either start a lot, usually. So it's very rare that what I have described, the Pacers, what I think they should do, happens. But it has happened, and it has happened to good players. And so I thought that was interesting. And that at least made me go, okay, maybe I'm writing this off too early. Maybe it actually is possible that the player they draft would start. I don't think they will. I don't think they would. But is it possible after doing this exercise? I suppose it's possible. However, the number 1 pick specifically, congrats to any of you who remember this, the last time the first overall pick in the draft was played over 65 games and started less than half of them as a rookie was Andrea Bargnani, who came off the bench for the Toronto Raptors behind Chris Bosh and Raso Nesterovic in the mid-2000s. It's very rare. I still think that the Pacers might be the second team this century to have that happen if they were to get the number 1 pick. But this exercise made me go, okay, I'm surprised how small the number is, but I feel less crazy that the players that this did apply to all turned out to be pretty good, and their winning situation turned out to be helpful for them. And that is today's show. The next 2 days, speaking of the draft, will be draft previews. Tomorrow, I'm recording the Darren Peterson one, and then Thursday, I'm recording the Caleb Wilson one, just the way this week worked out with the guests. So I could not, realistically do any differently. Sorry about 3 days in a row of just me. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. You can find me on social media at Tony R. East, and this podcast at Locked On Pacers. Back tomorrow talking some Darren Peterson. Until then, everybody have a wonderful day.